The skeletal pregnant mare trembled in the auction ring as the auctioneer callously declared her just dog food waiting to happen, her desperate eyes locking onto Thomas's weathered face. With one defiant bid, the elderly rancher unknowingly made himself the target of a ruthless trader who would discover, too late, the true value of what he'd carelessly discarded. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The auction barn buzzed with activity under the harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the gentle morning sunshine that had greeted Thomas Morgan as he drove his old pickup truck down the long country roads. At 72, Thomas moved with the deliberate pace of a man who had learned that rushing rarely improved matters. His weathered hands, marked with decades of ranch work, gripped his walking stick as he navigated through the crowd, his faded denim shirt patched in several places, a testament to his frugal nature rather than any financial necessity. Thomas hadn't planned on attending the livestock auction today. His modest ranch had all the animals he could handle at his age, but something had drawn him here. Perhaps the same intuition that had guided him through 5 decades of ranching, through droughts and blizzards, through the loss of his beloved wife Sarah, and through the gradual adaptation to a solitary life that followed. "Didn't expect to see you here today, old-timer," called Frank Wilson, the owner of the neighboring property, his voice carrying over the din of conversation and the occasional whinny of horses. "Thought you weren't adding any more animals to that ranch of yours." Thomas nodded, the brim of his straw hat shifting slightly. "Just looking today, Frank. Sometimes it's good to get out, see what's happening in the world." Frank laughed, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "Well, don't let Martha know you're here. She'll have you taking home every sad case in the place." Thomas smiled faintly. His reputation for soft-heartedness was well known, though he preferred to think of it as simple decency. He'd never understood the callousness some ranchers develop toward their livestock. To Thomas, every animal deserved respect and care, regardless of its economic value. As the auction progressed, Thomas found himself wandering toward the holding pens. The familiar smells of hay, manure, and livestock filled his nostrils, scents that had been the backdrop to his entire adult life. He observed the animals with a practiced eye, noting their condition, their temperament, the subtle signs that indicated health or its absence. That's when he saw her. In the corner of the last pen, separated slightly from the other horses, stood a bay mare. Even from a distance, Thomas could see that she was in poor condition. Her coat lacked luster, her head hung low, and her ribs showed clearly against her dull hide. But what caught his attention most was the distinctive swell of her belly. She was pregnant, and from the look of it, probably in her second trimester. Thomas approached the pen slowly, his brow furrowing with concern. The mare lifted her head as he drew near, her dark eyes reflecting a wariness born of hard experience. He extended his hand, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Easy there, girl. I'm not going to hurt you." The mare's ears flicked forward, a flicker of interest showing through her exhaustion. Thomas reached for the information card attached to the pen and felt a surge of anger as he read it. The mare was listed simply as Stockter 147 with no name, no breeding information, and a notation that she was sold as is, no guarantees. Someone had scrawled, "Lame meat buyer probable," across the bottom. "Hey, old man, you interested in that worthless nag?" The voice came from behind him, rough and dismissive. Thomas turned to see a man in his 40s, heavy-set with a perpetual sneer that seemed etched into his face. Thomas recognized him as Dale Harmon, a trader with a reputation for cutting corners and treating animals as mere commodities. "She's pregnant," Thomas said quietly, a statement rather than a question. Dale shrugged. "Yeah, got her from a foreclosure. Owner couldn't pay his debts, so the bank took everything. She's got some issues with her left front leg, probably from poor shoeing, Wouldn't waste your time, she's just dog food waiting to happen, or maybe some glue. He laughed at his own cruel joke. Thomas felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a mixture of anger and resolve that had driven him to action many times throughout his life. He looked at the mare again, who had moved slightly closer to where he stood at the fence. There was something in her eyes, not just fear or pain, but a quiet dignity that touched something deep within him. "When is she up for auction?" Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She's in the next group. Won't fetch much, probably just the meat price. Hey, if you're actually interested, I've got some real quality stock you might want to look at instead." Dale's eyes gleamed with the prospect of a sale. Thomas shook his head. "I'll wait." Dale's expression soured. "Suit yourself. Throwing money away if you ask me." He walked away, already scanning the crowd for better prospects. Left alone with the mare, Thomas spoke to her quietly. "They don't see your worth, do they, girl? But I do." The mare's ears pricked forward again, her attention focused on Thomas as if she understood every word. Perhaps she did. Horses had always seemed to Thomas to possess a wisdom that many humans lacked. As the auction for the mare's group drew near, Thomas positioned himself carefully in the crowded sales arena. He knew most of the buyers and sellers by sight, if not by name, having lived in the county all his life. He spotted several meat buyers, easily identified by their impassive expressions and the rapid calculations that seemed to be constantly running behind their eyes. When stock number 147 was led into the ring, there was a noticeable lack of interest from the crowd. The mare limped slightly, her condition even more apparent under the bright lights of the arena. The auctioneer, sensing the mood, started the bidding low. "Who'll give me 200 for this mare? She's in foal, folks. 200. Do I hear 200? A meat buyer raised his hand casually, not even looking up from his catalog. "I have 200. Do I hear 250? Thomas raised his hand. 250. The meat buyer glanced up, frowned slightly, then raised his hand again. 300. 350, Thomas countered immediately. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose slightly, but he continued his rapid patter. 350. I have 350. Do I hear 4? The meat buyer hesitated, then nodded. 400. 500, Thomas said, his voice clear and firm. The meat buyer looked at Thomas directly now, his expression a mixture of annoyance and calculation. After a moment, he shook his head slightly and looked back down at his catalog. 500 once, 500 twice, the auctioneer called, scanning the crowd. Sold to the gentleman in the straw hat for $500. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. He'd paid more than the mare was worth by market standards, but that wasn't the point. As he made his way to the office to complete the paperwork, he caught Dale staring at him with a mixture of amusement and contempt. "Hope you know what you're doing, old man," Dale called. "That mare's one step away from the glue factory." Thomas didn't bother to respond. He'd heard such comments before, from men who measured an animal's worth solely in dollars and cents. But Thomas had always known there were more important currencies in this world: compassion, loyalty, the simple dignity of giving a creature a chance when no one else would. After completing the paperwork and paying for the mare, Thomas arranged for her to be loaded into his horse trailer. He'd need to drive carefully on the way home, mindful of her condition and the precious life she carried. The drive back to Thomas's ranch was slow and careful, each bump in the weathered country road causing him to wince in sympathy for his new charge. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape as his old truck and trailer made their way home, the familiar silhouette of the Morgan homestead finally appearing on the horizon. The simple white farmhouse, weathered barn, and surrounding pastures had been in his family for 3 generations. It wasn't grand by any means, but it was a place of peace, a sanctuary Thomas had maintained through decades of hard work and quiet persistence. As he pulled up to the barn, his border collie Rusty came bounding across the yard, barking a welcome. Thomas parked carefully and eased himself out of the truck, his joints stiff from the drive. "Got a new guest, Rusty," he told the dog, who cocked his head curiously. "She needs our help." Opening the trailer door slowly, Thomas spoke in soothing tones before he even saw the mare. "We're home now, girl. This is a good place. You're safe here." The mare stood trembling slightly, her dark eyes wary as she surveyed her new surroundings. Thomas didn't rush her, knowing that trust wasn't something to be forced, especially with an animal that had clearly known mistreatment. After several minutes of gentle coaxing, the mare finally stepped hesitantly down the ramp, her left front leg touching the ground with noticeable caution. Up close in the natural light, Thomas could see her condition was even worse than he'd thought. Beyond her prominent ribs and dull coat, there were old scars on her flanks, and her hooves were in terrible shape. But her eyes, there was still a spark there, a will to live that touched Thomas deeply. "Let's get you settled," he murmured, leading her slowly toward the barn. He'd prepared a spacious stall with fresh bedding, clean water, and small portions of high-quality hay. Too much rich food too quickly would be dangerous for a horse in her condition. The mare sniffed the hay cautiously before taking a small mouthful, and Thomas felt a surge of relief. At least she had an appetite. As dusk settled over the ranch, Thomas made a phone call to Dr. Hannah Lewis, the local veterinarian who had cared for his animals for the past 15 years. Hannah answered on the third ring, her voice tired but friendly. "Morgan residence, this is Hannah." "Hannah, it's Thomas. Sorry to bother you at home, but I've got a situation that might need your attention." He explained about the mare, describing her condition as accurately as he could. Hannah listened quietly, only interrupting occasionally for clarification. "I can come by first thing tomorrow," she said when he'd finished. "Sounds like she needs a thorough examination, especially with the pregnancy. Have you named her yet?" Thomas hadn't thought about a name. At the auction, she had just been a number, a piece of inventory to be bought and sold. But standing in his barn, watching her cautiously explore her new surroundings, she deserved far more than that. "Hope," he said finally. "I think I'll call her Hope." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect early autumn day that made Thomas grateful to be alive. He rose with the sun, as he had for most of his life, and went directly to the barn. Hope was awake, standing quietly in her stall. She tensed slightly when he entered, but didn't back away as she had the previous evening. "Good morning, Hope," he said softly, moving slowly to avoid startling her. "Let's see how you're doing today." He offered her a small apple from his pocket, holding it flat on his palm. Hope hesitated, then delicately took the offering, the gentle movement of her lips against his hand bringing a smile to Thomas's weathered face. Hannah arrived an hour later, her truck pulling up outside the barn in a cloud of dust. She was a tall woman in her 40s with practical clothes and a no-nonsense manner that belied her gentle way with animals. Thomas had always appreciated her straightforward approach and genuine concern for her patients. "So, this is our new girl," Hannah said, entering the stall with careful movements. Hope backed into the corner, eyes wide. "She's had a rough time," Thomas explained. "Previous owner foreclosed on, then straight to auction. Been mishandled from the look of it." Hannah nodded, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of Hope's condition. "Let me do a full examination. It might take a while, she's pretty nervous." With patience and gentle persistence, Hannah managed to complete her examination. She checked Hope's teeth, eyes, and ears, listened to her heart and lungs, carefully examined her swollen belly, and finally made a thorough inspection of the problematic left front leg. "Well," she said finally, stepping back and removing her gloves, You've got your work cut out for you, Thomas. She's malnourished, but not critically so. The pregnancy appears to be progressing normally. I'd estimate she's about 6 months along. The lameness in her left leg is from an old injury that wasn't properly treated. There's some tendon damage, but with proper care it should improve. Thomas nodded, absorbing the information. She'll recover then, both her and the foal? Hannah's expression was cautiously optimistic. With proper nutrition, rest, and care, yes, the next few months will be critical. She'll need a special diet to help her regain her strength without putting too much stress on the foal. The leg will need regular treatment. I'll show you what to do. And she needs time, Thomas. Time and patience. She's got both, Thomas said firmly, for as long as she needs. After Hannah left, having provided Thomas with medication, detailed instructions, and a promise to return in a week, Thomas spent the afternoon quietly working in the barn, letting Hope become accustomed to his presence. He didn't approach her unnecessarily or make any sudden movements. Just let her observe him as he went about his chores, talking to her occasionally in a low, even voice. By evening, he noticed a subtle change. When he brought her dinner, a carefully measured portion of the special feed Hannah had recommended, Hope didn't retreat to the corner of her stall. She stayed by the feeding trough, watching him with those expressive eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and a tentative hope. Small steps, Thomas told her, carefully measuring out her medication and mixing it with a bit of applesauce to make it more palatable. That's how we'll do this. Small steps every day. As darkness fell over the ranch, Thomas sat on a hay bale outside Hope's stall, not wanting to leave her alone on her first night. The barn was peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Through the open door, he could see the stars emerging in the clear sky, the same stars that had watched over this land and his family for generations. Hope moved to the front of her stall, her soft muzzle extending just over the half door. Thomas remained still, hardly daring to breathe. After a moment's hesitation, she stretched her neck a little further, her nose gently touching his shoulder. The briefest contact, withdrawn almost immediately, but unmistakable. Thomas smiled in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings were the most important part of any journey. The following weeks established a gentle rhythm on the Morgan Ranch. Each day, Thomas rose before dawn, his old bones protesting, but his heart pulling him to the barn where Hope waited. The mare's progress was slow but steady, like the gradual changing of seasons that had marked Thomas's life for 7 decades. "Morning, Hope," he'd greet her each day, his voice soft but cheerful. "Let's see what today brings us." At first, Hope would watch him warily from the corner of her stall, accepting his care but still uncertain. Thomas never rushed her, never expected more than she could give. He simply moved with steady patience, cleaning her stall, changing her water, measuring her feed with careful precision, and applying the treatments Hannah had prescribed for her injured leg. By the end of the 2nd week, Hope had begun to meet him at the stall door, her ears pricked forward in cautious greeting. The first time she whickered softly at his approach, Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun streaming through the barn windows. "You're starting to believe in me, aren't you, girl?" he murmured, offering her a gentle stroke along her neck. Hope allowed the touch, her eyes closing briefly in what Thomas could only interpret as contentment. It was a small victory, but Thomas had learned throughout his long life that the small victories were often the sweetest. One morning, as Thomas sat on an overturned bucket, massaging a special liniment into Hope's injured leg, his thoughts drifted back to another injured horse from decades past. Thunderbolt had been his pride and joy, a spirited bay gelding with a white blaze and the heart of a champion. They'd won countless ribbons at local shows, and Thomas had nursed ambitious dreams of bigger competitions, perhaps even a breeding program built around Thunderbolt's fine bloodlines. But then came the accident, a sudden storm, a spooked horse, a bad fall on rocky ground. The veterinarian at the time, an older man with cold eyes, had recommended immediate euthanasia. Not worth the expense or effort, he'd said dismissively, not understanding that to Thomas, Thunderbolt was more than just a financial investment or a potential prize winner. Sarah had understood, though. His dear Sarah, with her quiet strength and boundless compassion, had stood by him through the months of Thunderbolt's rehabilitation. "Some things are worth fighting for," she'd told him, "even when others think you're fighting a losing battle." Thunderbolt had never competed again, but he'd lived another 12 happy years on the Morgan Ranch, and the lessons of patience and perseverance had shaped Thomas's approach to both animals and people ever since. "You'd have liked Sarah," Thomas told Hope, continuing to work the liniment into her leg with gentle, practiced motions. "She never saw the world in terms of usefulness or profit. She saw the worth in every living thing." Hope lowered her head, nudging Thomas's shoulder lightly, as if encouraging him to continue his story and his ministrations. "She's been gone 8 years now," Thomas said, his voice growing softer. "Cancer. Too quick and too slow all at once. The house still feels empty sometimes, but out here," he gestured to the barn, "the pastures beyond. Out here I can still feel her with me." Hope's pregnancy was progressing well, her belly growing rounder as her overall condition improved. Her coat, once dull and lifeless, now showed the first hints of a healthy shine, and she had begun to gain weight, her ribs no longer quite so prominent beneath her skin. Hannah visited weekly, each time nodding with greater approval. "You're working miracles, Thomas," she remarked during her 4th visit, running experienced hands over Hope's growing belly. "The foal is developing nicely, and Hope herself is responding beautifully to your care." "She's doing all the hard work," Thomas replied, watching as Hope stood calmly for Hannah's examination. "I'm just providing the means." Hannah smiled knowingly. "Don't sell yourself short. That mare trusts you, and trust doesn't come easily to an animal that's been mistreated. You've given her something beyond food and medicine." As if to confirm Hannah's words, Hope turned her head and gently nuzzled Thomas's arm, a gesture that had become increasingly common in recent days. Thomas stroked her forehead, marveling at how those expressive eyes had changed, still cautious, but no longer filled with fear. Not everyone shared Hannah's appreciation for Thomas's efforts, however. Frank Wilson stopped by one afternoon, his truck kicking up dust as it roared up the driveway. Frank had been a good neighbor for decades, but his approach to ranching had always been more pragmatic than Thomas's, some might say more hard-headed. "Heard you've been playing nurse to some broken-down mare," Frank said without preamble, leaning against the fence as Thomas led Hope around the small paddock for her daily exercise. "Hannah can't stop talking about your rescue project." "Hope's coming along just fine," Thomas replied mildly, sensing the skepticism in Frank's tone. Frank shook his head. "At your age, Thomas, should you really be taking on a project like this? That mare's going to need months of care, and then there's the foal to consider. What happens if you get sick or if your back goes out again like it did last winter?" "I manage," Thomas said simply, though Frank's words had struck a nerve. He had indeed struggled through several bouts of back pain in recent years, the legacy of decades of ranch work and the simple reality of aging. There had been days when even getting out of bed had seemed an insurmountable challenge. "I'm not trying to rain on your parade," Frank continued, his expression softening slightly. "Just worried about you out here all alone, taking on more than you might be able to handle." Thomas appreciated his neighbor's concern, even if he didn't share his pessimism. "I've got Hannah checking in regularly, and there's always young Miguel who helps with the heavy work twice a week." He paused, running a hand along Hope's neck. "Besides, I'm not alone." "Not really." Frank clearly wasn't convinced, but he knew Thomas well enough to recognize when further argument would be futile. "Well, you know where to find me if you need help," he said finally, pushing himself away from the fence. "Just don't be too proud to ask, you old coot." After Frank left, Thomas stood for a long moment in the paddock, Hope quiet beside him. The mare seemed to sense his troubled thoughts, pressing her muzzle gently against his arm in what felt remarkably like reassurance. "Don't you worry," he told her softly. "We'll manage just fine, you and I. One day at a time, that's how we'll do it." The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the pastures, and in the distance, Thomas could hear the familiar sounds of his small herd of cattle settling for the evening. This land, these animals, the rhythm of days marked by sunrise and sunset. This had been his life for so long that he could scarcely imagine any other. Hope had become part of that rhythm now, a new note in an old familiar song. He patted her neck one last time before leading her back to the barn. "Big day tomorrow," he told her. "Time to start introducing you to the others. You're ready for that now, I think." Hope's ears pricked forward at his words, her step momentarily lighter despite her lingering lameness. Thomas smiled, recognizing the spark of curiosity and perhaps even anticipation in her response. Every small sign of a recovering spirit felt like a personal victory, a confirmation that he'd made the right choice that day at the auction, when he'd followed his heart, rather than cold practicality. Dawn broke with a spectacular display of pinks and golds that painted the eastern sky. Thomas stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as the world slowly illuminated around him. Days like this reminded him why he'd never been tempted to leave this land, even when times were hard. There was a peace here that seeped into your bones if you stayed long enough, a connection to something larger and more enduring than one human life. After finishing his coffee, he made his way to the barn, where Hope greeted him with a soft nicker. Her eyes, once so full of fear, now held a tentative trust that warmed Thomas more effectively than the rising sun. "Today's the day, girl," he told her, offering a gentle scratch behind her ears. "Time to expand your horizons a bit." Thomas had planned this introduction carefully. Hope had been kept separate from his other animals during her initial recovery, allowing her to adjust to her new environment without additional stress. But isolation wasn't healthy for a herd animal long-term, and Thomas knew that proper socialization would be important for both Hope and her eventual foal. His small stable currently housed 3 other horses: Dolly, an elderly dappled mare who had been Sarah's favorite riding horse; Samson, a sturdy quarter-horse gelding that Thomas still rode occasionally for checking fence lines; and Pippin, a mischievous pony that had originally been purchased for his granddaughter's visits, but had quickly become a permanent resident. They were a compatible group, calm and well-mannered, ideal companions for a nervous mare regaining her confidence. After completing Hope's morning care routine, Thomas attached a lead rope to her halter and slowly guided her from the security of her stall. "Nice and easy," he murmured as they stepped into the central corridor of the barn. Hope's ears flicked back and forth, her nostrils flaring as she caught the scents of the other horses. They made their way outside to the small paddock nearest the barn. Thomas had deliberately chosen this area for Hope's first introduction, close enough to the barn for her to retreat to familiar territory if needed, but open enough to allow proper horse interactions without too much confinement. Dolly was already in the paddock, grazing peacefully in the morning sun. At 28, she was the matriarch of Thomas's small herd, her gentle disposition unchanged by age. Thomas led Hope to the fence, allowing her to observe Dolly from a safe distance. "That's Dolly," he told Hope, speaking in the same conversational tone he always used with his animals. "She's been here longer than anyone. Good judge of character, too." Hope's ears pricked forward with interest, her body tense but not panicked. Dolly, sensing their presence, lifted her head and regarded them with calm curiosity. After a moment, the older mare ambled over, her movements unhurried and deliberate. Thomas held Hope's lead rope loosely, ready to create distance if needed, but not wanting to communicate anxiety through tension. "Easy now," he said softly. "Dolly's just saying hello." The two mares sniffed at each other across the fence, the universal greeting ritual of horses. Hope's muscles remained taut beneath Thomas's hand on her neck, but she didn't pull away. Dolly, with the wisdom of age, maintained a respectful distance while still making her peaceful intentions clear. After several minutes of this careful interaction, Thomas opened the gate and led Hope into the paddock. Hope hesitated at the threshold, her injured leg briefly lifting as if uncertain about this new terrain. Thomas waited patiently, allowing her to decide when she was ready to proceed. Finally, with a soft exhale that seemed to Thomas like a decision being made, Hope stepped forward into the paddock. Dolly maintained her position several yards away, grazing again but with one ear consistently turned toward the newcomer. Thomas led Hope around the perimeter of the paddock, letting her familiarize herself with this expanded environment. Her steps grew more confident as they completed a full circuit, her head lifting to take in the sights and sounds of the ranch spread out before her. "What do you think?" Thomas asked her. "Not a bad place to call home, is it?" After walking the boundary, Thomas brought Hope to a stop and unclipped the lead rope from her halter, giving her freedom within the confines of the paddock. She stood still for a moment, as if uncertain what to do with this new liberty, then took a few hesitant steps away from him. Dolly, sensing the shift, lifted her head again and approached with the same unhurried pace. This time, without the fence between them, the interaction felt more significant. Thomas held his breath as the two mares went through their greeting ritual again, hoping that his judgment about their compatibility would prove correct. His concern proved unnecessary. After a brief exchange of breath and scent, Dolly turned slightly away, presenting her shoulder to Hope in a non-threatening posture that clearly communicated acceptance. Hope remained still for a moment longer, then mirrored the position, her body language relaxing noticeably. Thomas smiled, recognizing the silent communication that had just occurred. It wasn't instant friendship. Horses didn't work that way. But it was acceptance, the beginning of herd integration that would provide Hope with the social structure she needed. He retreated to the fence, allowing the mares to adjust to each other without human interference. Dolly returned to grazing, and after a few minutes of standing alert, Hope cautiously began to do the same, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly drawing comfort from the older mare's calm presence. Throughout the morning, Thomas worked on chores within sight of the paddock, keeping an eye on the interaction while giving Hope space to adjust. By midday, the two mares had established a comfortable rhythm, grazing near each other without tension. After lunch, Thomas introduced Samson, leading the gelding to the adjoining paddock where he could see and smell the mares without direct contact. Samson, ever the gentleman, showed polite interest without excessive excitement. Hope seemed more confident now with Dolly nearby, approaching the fence to investigate this new neighbor with curiosity rather than fear. "You're doing wonderfully," Thomas told her, offering an apple slice from his pocket. Hope accepted the treat with delicate precision, her muzzle soft against his palm. These small moments of connection continued to amaze him, the trust being built between them, one patient day at a time. By late afternoon, when Hannah arrived for her scheduled visit, Hope was contentedly sharing the paddock with both Dolly and Samson, the three horses forming a loose triangle as they grazed, close enough for company, but with each maintaining their personal space. "Well, would you look at that?" Hannah remarked, leaning against the fence next to Thomas. "She's integrating beautifully. You've got good instincts, Thomas." Thomas shrugged modestly. The horses are doing all the work. They understand each other better than we ever could." Hannah smiled, her expression knowing. "Don't discount your role. The way you've handled her rehabilitation, introducing changes gradually, giving her security and routine, that's made all the difference." They watched as Hope navigated her way to a fresh patch of grass, her movements still showing the slight hitch from her injured leg, but with increasing confidence in her new environment. "She's going to make a good mother," Hannah observed. "She's calm, observant, sensible. All traits she'll pass on to her foal, both genetically and behaviorally." Thomas nodded, feeling a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. Hope's journey was far from complete, but each day brought new progress, small victories that accumulated like the changing seasons of his life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he felt increasingly confident that Hope had the strength to meet them, and that he would be there to help her every step of the way. As autumn deepened, painting the surrounding hills with splashes of gold and crimson, life at the Morgan Ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Hope spent her days in the paddock with her new herd mates, her nights in the safety of her stall, and throughout it all, Thomas watched over her with quiet devotion. Her body was filling out nicely, the proper nutrition and care gradually erasing the physical evidence of her previous neglect. Her pregnancy advanced steadily, her belly growing rounder as the precious life within continued to develop. "You're looking more like a proper horse every day," Thomas told her one crisp October morning as he brushed her coat, which now gleamed with health in the sunlight. Hope leaned into the brushstrokes, her eyes half closed with pleasure. These grooming sessions had become a special time for both of them, a daily ritual of care and connection that strengthened their bond. Miguel, the local teenager who helped around the ranch twice a week, paused in his work mucking out stalls to observe them. "She really loves you, Mr. Morgan," he said, leaning on his pitchfork. "Never seen a horse look at someone the way she looks at you." Thomas smiled, continuing the long, smooth brushstrokes down Hope's neck. "We understand each other, I think. Both been through some rough patches. Makes you appreciate the good times more." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. At 16, he was still forming his views of the world, but his natural affinity for animals and willingness to work hard had made him invaluable around the ranch. Thomas had been teaching him horsekeeping skills, and the boy had proven to be a quick study. "My grandmother says animals can see into your soul," Miguel said. "She says they know who has a good heart." "Your grandmother is a wise woman," Thomas replied. "You'd do well to listen to her." The peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle coming up the drive, not the familiar rumble of Hannah's truck, but something heavier, more aggressive. Thomas frowned, setting down the brush and patting Hope reassuringly as she tensed at the noise. "Keep an eye on her, will you, Miguel? I'll see who that is." Thomas made his way around the barn just in time to see a gleaming black pickup truck pull to a stop in a cloud of dust. The truck was new and expensive, with custom wheels and tinted windows, the kind of ostentatious vehicle that had always struck Thomas as trying too hard to impress. The driver's door swung open, and Dale Harmon, the trader from the auction, stepped out, his face set in a smug expression that immediately put Thomas on guard. "Well, well, if it isn't the horse whisperer himself," Dale called, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone Thomas remembered from their previous encounter. "Thought I'd stop by and see if that worthless mare has managed to survive." Thomas's expression remained neutral, though he felt a flare of anger at the man's callous words. "What brings you out this way, Harmon? This is private property." Dale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just doing my due diligence. See, after you left the auction with your investment, I got to thinking that mare came from the Blackwell foreclosure, and there might be some paperwork issues that need clearing up." Thomas didn't like the sound of that. "What kind of issues?" "Registry issues, maybe ownership questions." Could affect the foal's value depending on what you're planning to do with it. Dale made a show of looking around the ranch, his expression calculated. Nice place you got here, Morgan. Small, but well kept. Be a shame if legal complications caused you any trouble. The threat, though veiled, was clear enough. Thomas felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Not fear, but the tension that came with recognizing a predator circling. All the paperwork from the auction was in order, Thomas said evenly. If there were registry issues, they should have been disclosed at the time of sale. Dale shrugged. Sometimes things slip through the cracks, but I'm sure we could work something out. He pulled out a business card and held it out. Give me a call if you decide you want to avoid potential complications. I might even be willing to take the mare and foal off your hands. Save you the headache. Thomas didn't take the card. I think you should leave now, Harmon. Dale's facade of friendliness slipped, revealing a harder edge beneath. Don't be hasty, old man. I'm offering you a way out of what could be a messy situation. There's nothing messy about it, Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. I purchased that mare legally and she's staying right here. Now I won't ask you again to leave my property. For a moment, Dale looked as though he might argue further, but something in Thomas's unwavering gaze seemed to give him pause. With a forced laugh, he tossed the business card onto the ground between them. Have it your way, but this isn't over. He climbed back into his truck, the engine roaring to life with unnecessary force. I'll be in touch. As the black truck disappeared down the drive, Thomas bent slowly to pick up the discarded card, his joints protesting the movement. He stood for a long moment, thinking, before tucking the card into his shirt pocket and returning to the barn. Miguel looked up anxiously as he entered. Everything okay, Mr. Morgan? That guy looked like trouble. Just someone trying to cause problems where there aren't any, Thomas replied, not wanting to worry the boy. He moved to Hope's side, running a gentle hand along her neck. She pressed close to him, as if sensing his disturbance and offering comfort. That evening, after Miguel had gone home and the chores were done, Thomas sat on the porch with Rusty at his feet, watching the sunset and turning over Dale's visit in his mind. The business card lay on the small table beside him, alongside the phone. After some consideration, he picked up the phone and dialed Hannah's number. She answered on the second ring, and Thomas could hear the sounds of her family dinner in the background. Hannah, it's Thomas. Sorry to bother you at home. No bother, she assured him. Is Hope okay? Hope's fine, but I had a visitor today, Dale Harmon from the auction. He seems to think there might be some issue with Hope's paperwork, something about the Blackwell foreclosure. Hannah was silent for a moment. That's odd. The Blackwell situation was pretty straightforward. Bank took everything, liquidated the assets. There shouldn't be any complications. That's what I thought, but Harmon seemed pretty insistent there could be problems. Sounds like he's fishing, Hannah said, her tone hardening slightly. Trying to intimidate you for some reason. Did he want something specific? Offered to take Hope and the foal off my hands. Saved me the headache, as he put it. I bet he did, Hannah replied, and Thomas could picture her frown. Listen, my brother-in-law works for the county clerk's office. I can ask him to check if there are any liens or ownership disputes on record from the Blackwell property. Might give us an idea if Harmon's bluffing or if there's something legitimate to worry about. I'd appreciate that, Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. Don't like the idea of that man causing trouble for Hope. She's been through enough. I'll call you tomorrow once I know something, Hannah promised. And Thomas, don't let Harmon push you around. Whatever he's after, it's not about paperwork. After hanging up, Thomas sat in the growing darkness, mulling over the situation. Rusty shifted at his feet, looking up with concerned brown eyes that seemed to mirror his own worry. "Don't fret, old boy," Thomas told the dog, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "We've weathered worse storms than Dale Harmon." But as he made his final rounds of the barn that night, checking on Hope one last time before bed, Thomas couldn't quite shake the uneasiness that had settled over him. Hope greeted him with her usual gentle nicker, pushing her nose against his chest in what had become her customary greeting. "Nothing's going to happen to you," he promised her softly, stroking her forehead. "Not while I have anything to say about it." Hope's dark eyes met his, trusting and calm despite the worry he carried. In that moment, Thomas made a silent vow. Whatever Dale Harmon was planning, whatever challenges lay ahead, Hope would remain safe. He had given her his word when he'd brought her home, and Thomas Morgan had never been a man to break his promises. The following morning dawned with a chill that hinted at the winter to come. Thomas pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he made his way to the barn, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Inside, the familiar sounds and smells greeted him. The soft rustling of horses shifting in their stalls, the sweet scent of hay, the gentle nickering that always seemed to welcome him home. Hope was awake and alert, her ears pricking forward as Thomas approached her stall. Over the weeks, her eyes had gradually lost the haunted look they'd held when he first brought her home, replaced by a quiet awareness that recognized him as a source of safety and comfort. "Morning, beautiful," Thomas greeted her, opening the stall door and running a practiced eye over her expanding form. The pregnancy was advancing well, her belly now a pronounced curve beneath her increasingly healthy coat. "How's our little one doing today?" As if in answer, Hope shifted slightly, and Thomas noticed a ripple of movement across her side, the foal, active and growing within. The sight brought a smile to his weathered face. Despite the worry that Dale Harmon's visit had stirred up, there was something profoundly right about this moment, about being here with this mare who had somehow become so important to him in such a short time. After completing the morning feeding and turning the horses out into their paddock, Thomas returned to the house where the answering machine was blinking with a message. Hannah's voice filled the small kitchen as he pressed play. "Thomas, it's Hannah. I talked to my brother-in-law about the Blackwell situation. There's something you should know. Call me when you get this." The seriousness in her tone sent a spike of concern through him. Thomas immediately dialed her number and Hannah answered quickly. "What did you find out?" he asked without preamble. "The Blackwell foreclosure was legitimate," Hannah began. "But there's more to the story. The bank sold the entire livestock inventory to a broker, Westland Agricultural Holdings, who then parceled it out to various auctions and dealers. Dale Harmon was one of those dealers." Thomas frowned, trying to follow the implications. "So, Harmon's claim about paperwork issues is technically possible, but not in the way he implied," Hannah explained. "Here's where it gets interesting. My brother-in-law dug a little deeper, and it turns out that Hope, or stock number 147 as she was known then, wasn't just any mare. She's registered with the American Quarter Horse Association as Midnight Cascade. Her bloodlines are impressive. Her sire was a champion reiner, and her dam's line has produced several successful performance horses." Thomas felt a surge of surprise. "So she's valuable?" "Potentially very valuable, especially with a purebred foal on the way. The registration papers should have transferred with her at auction, but if they were lost or deliberately withheld, Harmon would know her true value," Thomas finished, understanding dawning, "and he let her go for meat price." "Exactly," Hannah confirmed. "My guess is he realized his mistake after you bought her, and now he's trying to intimidate you into selling her back cheaply so he can recoup his loss." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Not going to happen." "I figured that would be your response," Hannah said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "One more thing. I've contacted the AQHA about getting her registration sorted out. If we can prove her identity with DNA testing, which is fairly routine, we can have the papers transferred to you properly, regardless of what Harmon tries to pull." "Thank you, Hannah," Thomas said sincerely. "What would I do without you?" "Probably get into less trouble," she replied with a laugh. "I'll stop by later this week with the DNA testing kit. And Thomas, be careful with Harmon. Men like that don't like to lose." After hanging up, Thomas stood for a long moment by the window, looking out toward the barn where Hope was now visible in the paddock, grazing peacefully alongside Dolly. The morning sun caught her coat, highlighting the subtle dappling that was beginning to show through as her health improved. She was beautiful, not just any horse, but a registered quarter horse with championship bloodlines. No wonder Dale Harmon wanted her back. The knowledge should have made Thomas feel better, confirming that his instinct at the auction had been right, but instead, it only deepened his concern. If Hope was as valuable as Hannah suggested, Harmon might not give up easily. Throughout the day, Thomas found himself checking the driveway more often than usual, half expecting to see the black truck returning. But as the hours passed peacefully and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, he gradually relaxed. The evening chores provided their usual comfort, the routine of caring for the animals that had structured his days for decades. As he led Hope back to her stall for the night, she seemed to sense his lingering tension, pressing her head against his shoulder in a gesture that had become her way of offering comfort. Thomas smiled, scratching behind her ears the way she liked. "Nothing to worry about, girl," he assured her, though the words were as much for himself as for her. "We'll get everything sorted out." Later that evening, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing the auction paperwork spread before him. The bill of sale was straightforward enough. Stock 1147 sold to Thomas Morgan for $500, but there was no mention of registration papers, no acknowledgement of the mare's breeding or true identity. Whether by oversight or deliberate omission, Hope's value had been effectively concealed. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Thomas rose slowly, his joints stiff from sitting, and made his way to the front of the house. Opening the door revealed Frank Wilson standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Thomas," Frank greeted him. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Thomas replied, genuinely pleased to see his neighbor despite their occasional differences. "Come on in. Coffee's still hot." Frank settled at the kitchen table while Thomas poured him a cup. "Heard you had a visitor yesterday," Frank said without preamble. "Dale Harmon's truck isn't exactly inconspicuous." Thomas nodded, unsurprised that news traveled quickly in their small community. "He seems to think there might be some issue with the mare I bought at auction." Frank snorted. "Harmon's got issues, all right, but I doubt they have anything to do with proper paperwork. Man's got a reputation for cutting corners." "So I'm learning," Thomas agreed, sharing what Hannah had discovered about Hope's true identity. Frank whistled low. "Midnight Cascade, eh? I remember that line. Old man Johnston used to campaign a stud from that breeding. Talented horses, good temperaments too." He took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. "No wonder Harmon's sniffing around. A mare like that in foal, no less. He's looking at a significant loss." "What would you do, Frank?" Thomas asked, valuing his neighbor's practical perspective despite their different approaches to ranching. Frank considered for a moment. "Get the registration sorted proper first thing. Makes it harder for him to claim any rights to her. Then make it clear you know exactly what she's worth, that you're not some easy mark he can intimidate." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "And maybe consider that security system we talked about last year. Rural properties like ours, isolated as they are." He didn't need to finish the thought. Thomas had resisted the idea of security cameras, feeling they represented a sad commentary on changing times, but now the suggestion held more appeal. "I'll think about it," he promised. After Frank left, Thomas made one final trip to the barn, needing to check on Hope before he could settle for the night. She was resting comfortably, her eyes opening lazily at his approach. "You've been keeping secrets," he told her softly. "Midnight Cascade, quite the fancy name for a humble ranch horse." Hope's response was to stretch her neck over the stall door, seeking his touch. Thomas obliged, stroking her velvety muzzle. "Doesn't matter what your papers say," he continued. "You're Hope to me. And this is your home now, no matter what Dale Harmon has to say about it." As if understanding, Hope pressed closer, her warm breath ghosting over his weathered hands in the cool night air. 3 days passed without further incident. Thomas maintained his regular routine, but with a heightened awareness of his surroundings that he hadn't felt necessary in years. He found himself listening more intently to Rusty's barks, glancing more frequently down the long driveway and checking the locks on the barn with extra care each night. Hope continued to thrive despite his concerns, her coat growing more lustrous and her gait becoming smoother as the special exercises Hannah had prescribed strengthened her injured leg. On Thursday afternoon, Hannah arrived with the DNA testing kit from the American Quarter Horse Association. Thomas watched as she carefully collected hair samples from Hope's mane and tail, placing them in labeled envelopes. "How long will the results take?" he asked as Hannah completed the paperwork. 2 weeks, maybe 3, she replied. "The AQHA is efficient, but thoroughness takes time. Once we have confirmation, they'll issue new registration papers in your name." She glanced up at him, her expression reassuring. "It's all perfectly standard procedure, Thomas. Even if Harmon tries to contest it, the DNA doesn't lie." Thomas nodded, feeling some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "And in the meantime?" Hannah's smile faded slightly. "In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Take good care of her, document everything, and don't let Harmon intimidate you. If he shows up again, don't engage with him alone. Call me or Sheriff Grayson." "I've handled difficult men before," Thomas said mildly. "I know you have," Hannah replied, her tone gentle but firm. "But you're 72, Thomas, and Harmon isn't above using that against you. Promise me you'll be careful." Thomas promised, though he privately thought Hannah was being overly cautious. Dale Harmon struck him as the type who relied on intimidation rather than direct confrontation, a blusterer rather than a fighter. Still, he appreciated her concern. After Hannah left, Thomas spent some extra time with Hope, grooming her thoroughly while talking to her in the low, conversational tone that she seemed to find soothing. The mare leaned into his touch, occasionally turning her head to nudge his arm or shoulder in what had become her characteristic gesture of affection. "You're not just any horse, are you?" he murmured, running the brush along her increasingly rounded sides. "Midnight Cascade, probably worth more than my truck even before considering the little one you're carrying." Hope's ear flicked back at the sound of his voice, and Thomas smiled. Whether she understood his words or simply responded to his tone, there was a communication between them that transcended language, a connection that had deepened with each passing day. Later that evening, after finishing his chores and settling in with a simple dinner, Thomas heard Rusty bark sharply from the porch. The border collie rarely barked without cause, especially at night. Setting down his fork, Thomas rose and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing unusual, but then a flicker of movement caught his eye. A flash of light near the barn, too steady to be lightning, too focused to be a passing car's headlights. Thomas's heart quickened. Someone was out there with a flashlight, moving around his barn in the dark. Without hesitation, he reached for the shotgun kept in the coat closet by the door, not loaded but a deterrent nonetheless, and stepped out onto the porch. Rusty stood alert at his side, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Hello?" Thomas called, his voice carrying in the still night air. "This is private property." The light by the barn immediately extinguished. Thomas strained his eyes, trying to discern movement in the darkness, but the night was cloudy, with little moonlight to aid his aging vision. Rusty's growl deepened, the dog's body tense beside him. "I've called the sheriff," Thomas announced, though he hadn't yet had the chance. "Might want to clear out before they arrive." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps, followed by the distant slam of a car door and an engine starting up. Headlights briefly illuminated the far end of the driveway before the vehicle pulled away, moving too quickly for Thomas to identify it. Rusty barked again, straining toward the barn as if eager to investigate. Thomas laid a restraining hand on the dog's collar. "Easy, boy, let's check on the horses first." With the shotgun still in hand, Thomas made his way carefully to the barn, switching on the exterior lights as he approached. The door was still locked exactly as he'd left it, but he could see fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the paddock fence, evidence that someone had indeed been there. Inside, the horses were unsettled but unharmed. Samson and Dolly moved restlessly in their stalls, while Pippin the pony whinnied shrilly at Thomas's entrance. Hope, however, was oddly calm, standing alert in her stall, with her ears pricked forward, as if she had been expecting him. Thomas checked each stall carefully, looking for any sign of tampering or disturbance, but found nothing out of place. Only after he was satisfied that all was secure did he return to the house to call Sheriff Grayson. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, his patrol car crunching up the gravel driveway with lights but no siren. Jim Grayson had been the local sheriff for nearly 15 years, and before that, he had served as a deputy under his predecessor. He knew the community well, including Thomas, whom he greeted with a firm handshake. "Sorry to call you out so late," Thomas apologized as they walked toward the barn. Sheriff Grayson waved away the concern. "Rather check a trespasser report and find nothing than miss something important. Hannah Lewis filled me in earlier today about your situation with Harmon. Thought he might try something like this." Together, they examined the tire tracks in the area around the barn. The sheriff took photographs and measurements, his expression growing more serious as the investigation proceeded. "These aren't from a pickup," he observed, gesturing to the tracks. "Narrower tires, probably a car. Harmon drives that oversized truck, doesn't he?" Thomas nodded. "Black Ford F-350, brand new by the look of it." "So either it wasn't Harmon or he wasn't alone," the sheriff concluded. "Either way, I don't like it." He straightened up, wincing slightly as his knees cracked. "I'll file a report and have the deputies drive by more frequently for the next few weeks. In the meantime, might be worth considering some additional security. Camera system, maybe?" Frank suggested the same thing, Thomas admitted. "Never thought I'd need such measures out here." Sheriff Grayson's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Times change, Thomas. Rural doesn't mean safe anymore, not when there's something valuable at stake." After the sheriff left, promising to follow up with Harmon the next day, Thomas found himself too restless for sleep. He returned to the barn, dragging an old armchair from the tack room into the central aisle where he could see all the stalls. Rusty settled at his feet, chin on paws but eyes alert. "Just for tonight," Thomas told the dog, though he wasn't sure if he was justifying the arrangement to Rusty or to himself. "Don't want them getting spooked again." The horses seemed to appreciate his presence. One by one they relaxed, Dolly and Samson eventually lying down in their stalls. Hope remained standing longest, her dark eyes fixed on Thomas as if keeping watch alongside him. Only when he assured her repeatedly that all was well did she finally lower herself carefully to the straw, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward but deliberate. As the night deepened around them, Thomas felt a curious peace settle over him despite the earlier alarm. The barn was warm and familiar, filled with the comforting sounds of animals at rest. Soft breathing, occasional sighs, the rustle of straw as they shifted position. These horses, this land, this life he had built through decades of hard work and quiet dedication, they were worth protecting, worth fighting for. And Hope, with her unborn foal and her newly discovered lineage, had become an unexpected but central part of that life. Whatever Dale Harmon or his associates had planned, Thomas was determined they would not succeed. Some things, once given, couldn't be taken back, and Thomas had given Hope his promise of safety and care. That promise, like his word on any matter, was unbreakable. The weekend brought a cold snap that painted the morning grass with frost and sent plumes of steam rising from the horses' nostrils as they grazed in the paddock. Thomas, bundled in his heaviest jacket, moved a bit slower than usual, the night in the barn chair having left his joints stiff and aching. But he welcomed the discomfort as a small price to pay for the peace of mind it had brought. Sheriff Grayson had called the previous afternoon with an update. He'd spoken to Dale Harmon, who had denied any knowledge of the trespassing incident, insisting he'd been at a livestock auction in the next county. The alibi checked out, according to the sheriff, though he'd added in a skeptical tone that it didn't mean Harmon couldn't have sent someone else. "Just keep your eyes open," the sheriff had advised, "and maybe think about that security system sooner rather than later." Thomas had taken the advice to heart. After consulting with Frank and Miguel, he'd ordered a simple camera system that would cover the barn and main paddock areas. Miguel, who had a knack for technology that Thomas lacked, had offered to help install it when it arrived. In the meantime, Thomas had improvised additional security measures, extra locks on the barn doors, solar-powered motion lights positioned strategically around the property, and Rusty now sleeping in the barn rather than on his usual porch bed. Hope seemed to sense the heightened vigilance, her own attention more focused whenever Thomas brought her out to the paddock. She stayed closer to him than before, her eyes tracking movement along the fence line with newfound alertness. Her pregnancy had advanced to the point where her sides stretched taut over her growing foal, and Hannah had estimated that they had perhaps another 6 to 8 weeks before the birth. "She's right on schedule," Hannah had assured him during her last visit. "The foal is positioned correctly. Strong heartbeat, good movement. She's going to be a good mother, Thomas. You can see it in how she's already protective, already preparing." Those words echoed in Thomas's mind as he watched Hope graze alongside Dolly, the two mares having formed a quiet friendship that seemed to bring comfort to both. Hope's maternal instincts were indeed becoming apparent. She was more cautious now, less inclined to play with Pippin when the pony sought attention, more deliberate in her movements. "Mr. Morgan?" Miguel's voice pulled Thomas from his thoughts. The teenager approached from the direction of the driveway, holding a large envelope. "The mail carrier asked me to give you this. Said it was too big for your mailbox." Thomas thanked him, taking the envelope with curiosity. The return address showed it was from the American Quarter Horse Association, much sooner than he'd expected to hear anything about Hope's DNA test. "Go ahead and start on the east paddock fence," he told Miguel. "I noticed some loose boards yesterday." Once the boy had headed off with tools in hand, Thomas opened the envelope and began reading the enclosed letter. To his surprise, it wasn't about the DNA test results, those were still pending, but rather a response to an inquiry about Midnight Cascade's breeding history. According to the records, Midnight Cascade had been bred 3 times previously, producing foals that had gone on to successful careers in reining and cutting competitions. Her current pregnancy had been planned as part of a carefully selected breeding program, with the sire being a champion stallion named Diamond Dust Reminick, whose offspring commanded high prices in the performance horse market. Thomas let out a low whistle. No wonder Dale Harmon was so determined to get Hope back. The foal she carried could potentially be worth tens of thousands of dollars. The letter also included copies of Midnight Cascade's show records from her younger days. Before her injury, She had been quite successful in reining competitions, winning several significant titles. There were even a few photographs showing a younger, glossy version of Hope executing perfect sliding stops and spins, her rider beaming with pride. Thomas studied the images with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was proud to know that Hope had such an impressive history. It confirmed what he'd sensed about her from the beginning, that special quality that had drawn him to her at the auction. On the other hand, the knowledge only increased his worry about Harmon's determination to reclaim her. He tucked the letter and photographs back into the envelope, deciding to share them with Hannah when she next visited. For now, he would continue with the day's tasks, keeping this new information to himself. The morning passed uneventfully as Thomas and Miguel worked on various repairs around the ranch. By midday, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising an afternoon storm. Thomas sent Miguel home early, not wanting the boy to get caught in bad weather on his bicycle ride back to town. As the first raindrops began to fall, Thomas hurried to bring the horses in from the paddock. Dolly, Samson, and Pippin came willingly, eager for the shelter of their stalls and the extra feed that accompanied bad weather. Hope, however, was reluctant to leave the paddock, standing near the fence with her head raised, nostrils flared as she scented the wind. "Come on, girl," Thomas urged, tugging gently on her halter. "Storm's coming in fast." Hope resisted, her body tense. Ears pricked toward the tree line that marked the boundary of Thomas's property. Following her gaze, Thomas saw nothing unusual, just the trees swaying in the strengthening wind, their branches casting shifting shadows across the ground. But Hope's unease was contagious. Thomas found himself scanning the tree line more carefully, trying to see what had captured the mare's attention. For a moment there was nothing, then a flash of movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. Someone was watching from the edge of the woods. Thomas's heart rate quickened, but he kept his movements casual, continuing to coax Hope toward the barn, as if he'd noticed nothing amiss. Once inside, he secured all the horses in their stalls, then moved to the small window that overlooked the tree line. The rain was coming down harder now, obscuring visibility, but Thomas thought he could make out a figure retreating into the deeper woods. With steady hands that belied his inner tension, Thomas reached for the phone he now kept in the barn and dialed the sheriff's office. The deputy who answered promised to send someone out as soon as possible, but warned it might be a while due to the storm causing multiple incidents around the county. Thomas hung up, resigned to await. He checked the barn doors, ensuring they were securely locked, then moved from stall to stall, reassuring each horse with quiet words and gentle touches. Hope was still agitated, pacing her stall with her ears constantly moving, tracking sounds that Thomas could barely perceive beneath the drumming of rain on the roof. "I see your instincts are sharp as ever," he told her, offering a handful of oats that she sniffed but didn't eat. "Don't worry, girl. Not going to let anything happen to you or your little one." As if in response, Hope finally stilled, turning to press her forehead against Thomas's chest in that trusting gesture that never failed to move him. Thomas stroked her neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath his fingers, the warmth of her breath against his arm. "That's right," he murmured. "We're in this together." The storm raged outside, wind howling around the eaves of the old barn. But inside, surrounded by the horses that had become his family, Thomas felt a sense of resolve hardening within him. Whatever, or whoever, was out there, they would not find easy prey at the Morgan Ranch. He had spent his life protecting what he loved, and age had not diminished that determination. If anything, the years had only strengthened it, teaching him that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Hope and her unborn foal had become such a cause, not just animals in his care, but symbols of everything Thomas believed in: second chances, quiet dignity, the unbreakable bond between those who choose to trust one another despite past wounds. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world washed clean in the pale light of dawn. Thomas rose early, his sleep having been fitful at best. The deputy had finally arrived late the previous evening, searching the property perimeter, but finding nothing more than some partial footprints at the edge of the woods already half erased by the heavy rain. He'd promised increased patrols, but had clearly been skeptical about the threat, suggesting that perhaps it had just been a hiker seeking shelter from the storm. Thomas knew better. The Morgan Ranch was miles from any public trail, and the land beyond his property line was private as well, owned by an investment company that used it primarily for timber. No casual hiker would have ventured so far off the beaten path, especially in weather threatening to turn foul. After completing his morning chores, Thomas called Frank, who arrived within the hour, his truck loaded with equipment for the security camera installation. Frank had brought his son-in-law Robert along, a good-natured electrician whose expertise would ensure the system was properly set up. "Should have 4 cameras covering all approaches to the barn," Frank explained as they unloaded the gear. "Motion activated with night vision capability. Feed goes directly to your computer and your phone with alerts whenever there's activity." Thomas nodded gratefully. "Appreciate you boys coming out on such short notice." Frank clapped him on the shoulder. "Neighbors look out for each other, Thomas. Always have, always will." As Frank and Robert worked on installing the camera system, Thomas tended to Hope, who seemed to have recovered from her unease of the previous day. She greeted him with her customary gentle nudge, accepting the brush he offered with apparent pleasure as he carefully groomed her expanding sides. "Won't be long now," Thomas told her, noting how the foal shifted beneath his hand as he worked. "Few more weeks and we'll meet this little one. Bet they'll be as stubborn as you are." Hope's ear flicked back at the sound of his voice, and Thomas smiled, continuing his steady strokes along her back. The mare's coat gleamed in the morning light, testament to the care she'd received over the past months. It was hard to reconcile this healthy, alert horse with the frightened, malnourished creature he'd first encountered at the auction. By midday, the camera system was operational, with Frank giving Thomas a thorough tutorial on how to access the feeds and review footage. "Camera range extends about 30 feet into the tree line," he explained, pointing to the screen where the edge of the woods was clearly visible. "Anyone approaching from that direction will trigger an alert." Thomas thanked them both, insisting they stay for lunch before heading back to their own responsibilities. As they ate sandwiches at the kitchen table, Robert mentioned something that caught Thomas's attention. "Heard Dale Harmon's been spending a lot of time with the Wilcox brothers lately," he said, reaching for another pickle. "Those 3 together can't mean anything good." Thomas frowned. The Wilcox brothers had a reputation for operating on the edges of the law, not exactly criminals, but not entirely honest either. They ran a salvage business that many suspected was a front for dealing in stolen goods, though nothing had ever been proven conclusively. "What kind of business would Harmon have with them?" Thomas asked. Robert shrugged. "No idea. Just saw them at Mabel's diner yesterday, heads together over coffee, looking mighty serious about whatever they were discussing." After Frank and Robert left, Thomas found himself pondering this new information as he worked around the ranch. The association between Harmon and the Wilcox brothers added another layer of concern to an already worrying situation. If Harmon was desperate enough to involve men with questionable ethics, the threat to Hope might be more serious than Thomas had initially believed. That evening, Hannah stopped by to check on Hope, pronouncing her continued progress excellent. "She's carrying beautifully," Hannah observed, running practiced hands along the mare's sides. "Foal's position is good, strong movement. I'd say we're looking at another 6 weeks, give or take." Thomas shared the AQHA letter with her, watching as her eyebrows rose in surprise at the information about Diamond Dust Reminick being the sire. "This changes things," Hannah said, looking up from the papers. "That's an extremely valuable breeding. No wonder Harmon's so determined." "How valuable are we talking?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Hannah's expression was serious. Depending on the foal's quality and sex, potentially $50,000 or more, especially with Midnight Cascade's show record. If it's a colt with his sire's talent and his dam's temperament. She shook her head. Thomas, we need to be extra vigilant until that foal is born and the DNA test confirms your ownership. Before leaving, Hannah helped Thomas set up a foaling monitor in Hope's stall, a simple device that would alert him to any signs of early labor. Just in case, she explained. Given everything that's happened, I'd rather be overprepared than caught off guard. Thomas thanked her, grateful for her thoroughness and concern. After she left, he made a final check of the barn and newly installed security system before retiring to the house, Rusty at his heels. The border collie had taken to splitting his time between the barn and the house, as if understanding that both needed protection. As he prepared for bed, Thomas found his thoughts circling back to Hope and the journey they had shared over the past months. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, rescuing a mistreated mare from an uncertain fate, had evolved into something far more complex. Now there were valuable bloodlines to consider, potential legal complications, and the persistent threat posed by Dale Harmon and his associates. Yet beneath all those complications lay the same fundamental truth that had guided Thomas's decision that day at the auction. Every living creature deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Hope's value wasn't in her pedigree or the potential worth of her foal. It was in her courage, her gentle spirit, her willingness to trust again despite past mistreatment. Thomas fell asleep with these thoughts in mind, only to be awakened in the early hours of the morning by the sharp beeping of his phone. Fumbling in the darkness, he unlocked the screen to find an alert from the security system, motion detected at the northwest corner of the barn. Fully awake now, Thomas quickly pulled on his clothes and boots, grabbing his shotgun from the closet before heading outside. Rusty was already at the door, hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his throat. Thomas quieted him with a hand signal, not wanting to alert whoever was out there that they had been detected. The night was clear and cold, stars glittering overhead like distant ice crystals. Thomas moved carefully toward the barn, staying in the shadows, his eyes straining to detect movement in the darkness. The security light he'd installed remained off, which struck him as odd. It should have activated with any movement near the barn. When he reached the corner where the camera had detected motion, Thomas found the reason. The light had been deliberately disabled, its bulb removed with careful precision. The camera itself appeared intact, but had been repositioned to point away from the barn door. Thomas's heart rate quickened. This was no random trespasser or curious wildlife. This was deliberate, calculated. Someone had known about the security system and had taken steps to neutralize it without triggering obvious tampering alerts. With heightened caution, Thomas approached the barn door, finding it still securely locked. He unlocked it as quietly as possible and slipped inside, Rusty close at his heels. The interior was dark and quiet, but Thomas immediately sensed something was wrong. The usual peaceful sounds of horses at rest were absent, replaced by an unnatural stillness. "Hope," he called softly, moving toward her stall. A rustling sound was his only warning before a shape lunged at him from the shadows, knocking him sideways. Thomas stumbled, his shotgun clattering to the floor as he fought to regain his balance. Rusty barked sharply, launching himself at the attacker, teeth finding purchase in fabric and flesh. A shout of pain cut through the darkness as Rusty's teeth found their mark. Thomas scrambled to his feet, adrenaline overriding the protest of his aging joints. His hands found the wall switch, and suddenly the barn was flooded with light, revealing the chaotic scene. Two men, the Wilcox brothers, Thomas realized with a jolt, were struggling to control Hope, who was putting up a tremendous fight despite her advanced pregnancy. A lead rope was halfway attached to her halter, but the mare was tossing her head wildly, eyes rolling with fear and anger. Nearby, a third man, unmistakably Dale Harmon, was frantically trying to fend off Rusty, whose teeth were firmly clamped on his arm. "Get this damn dog off me," Harmon shouted, his face contorted with pain and rage. Thomas moved swiftly, retrieving his fallen shotgun but keeping it pointed at the floor. "Rusty, hold," he commanded, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. The border collie immediately released Harmon's arm but remained in an aggressive stance, hackles raised, teeth bared in warning. "You boys picked the wrong farm to rob," Thomas said, his tone deceptively calm. He could see hope continuing to resist the Wilcox brothers, their frustration growing as they failed to secure her. "This isn't robbery, old man," Harmon spat, clutching his bleeding arm. "We're repossessing property that rightfully belongs to me. That mare was sold by mistake. She was never supposed to go to auction." "Funny how you didn't mention that until after you learned her true value," Thomas replied, keeping the shotgun visible but still not raising it. "The AQHA seems to think differently about who she belongs to." Harmon's eyes narrowed. "You've been poking around where you shouldn't, Morgan. That DNA test you're waiting on won't help you if the mare's not here when the results come back." One of the Wilcox brothers, the taller one with a scar running along his jawline, managed to get a better grip on Hope's halter. "Come on, Dale. Let's get this done and get out of here." Thomas felt a cold fury building inside him but kept his voice even. "I suggest you let go of my horse now. Sheriff's already been called." It was a bluff. His phone was still in the house, but he delivered it with enough conviction to make Harmon hesitate. "He's lying," the second Wilcox brother hissed. "No way the sheriff knows we're here." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Harmon glanced nervously toward the barn door, clearly weighing his options. Hope chose that moment to deliver a well-aimed kick that caught the taller Wilcox brother squarely in the thigh, sending him stumbling backward with a howl of pain. "You said this would be easy," he shouted at Harmon, his face contorted with pain. "Said the old man wouldn't be a problem." Thomas took advantage of the momentary chaos, moving closer to Hope while keeping the three men in his sight line. "Last chance to walk away," he warned them. "Next time Rusty won't just bite to hold." The standoff might have continued, but then came the unmistakable sound of approaching vehicles, headlights sweeping across the barn windows as not one but two cars pulled into the driveway. "That'll be Sheriff Grayson," Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. He had no idea who was actually arriving, but silently thanked whatever neighbor or passing patrol had noticed unusual activity at the ranch. Harmon's face hardened, but he clearly recognized when a situation was turning against him. "This isn't over, Morgan," he spat, backing toward the side door. "That mare and her foal are worth more than this whole rundown ranch of yours. You haven't heard the last from me." "Actually, I believe he has," came a familiar voice from the main barn entrance. Sheriff Grayson stood framed in the doorway, his deputy a step behind him. "Dale Harmon, Ryan, and Sean Wilcox. Interesting place for a midnight gathering." The relief that flooded through Thomas nearly made his knees buckle. "Your timing is impeccable, Jim," he managed, lowering the shotgun completely. Sheriff Grayson nodded, his expression grim as he took in the scene. "Got an alert from your security system company. Seems when someone tampers with their equipment, they don't just notify the homeowner." He gestured to his deputy, who moved forward with handcuffs ready. "Breaking and entering, attempted theft of livestock, property damage. That's just for starters. You boys are in a world of trouble." As the sheriff and his deputy took the three men into custody, Thomas turned his attention to Hope, who was trembling visibly, her sides heaving with exertion. "Easy, girl," he murmured, approaching her slowly with hands outstretched. "It's over now. You're safe." But as he reached her side, Thomas noticed something alarming. A clear fluid pooling beneath the mare, running down her legs. His eyes widened in realization. "Sheriff," he called urgently, "I need to use your phone. The mare's water just broke." She's going into labor." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Hannah arrived within 30 minutes of Thomas's call, medical kit in hand and her expression focused with professional determination. The stress of the attempted theft had triggered early labor, she explained, though fortunately Hope was close enough to term that the foal's lungs should be sufficiently developed. "She's strong, and so is the little one," Hannah assured Thomas as they prepared the stall with fresh bedding. "Nature has a way of handling these things." Through the long night, Thomas remained at Hope's side, speaking softly to her through each contraction, offering comfort with his presence and gentle hands. Hannah monitored the labor's progress with calm efficiency, intervening only when absolutely necessary, allowing the natural process to unfold. As the first pink light of dawn crept through the barn windows, Hope gave a final powerful push, and her foal slid into the world. A leggy, wet little colt with a distinctive white blaze running down his face, unmistakably his father's son. "Look at that," Hannah whispered, her face alight with wonder despite her exhaustion. "Perfect delivery, perfect foal." Thomas watched in awe as Hope turned to her newborn, nickering softly in a tone he had never heard from her before, the special greeting of a mother to her child. The foal struggled to raise his head, instinct driving him to find his feet despite being only minutes old. "He's got his mother's determination," Thomas observed, his voice thick with emotion. Hannah smiled, checking the foal's vital signs with practiced hands. "And his father's confirmation. You've got a valuable boy here, Thomas. What will you call him?" Thomas considered for a moment, watching as the colt made his first wobbly attempts to stand, falling but immediately trying again with unwavering persistence. "Justice," he said finally. "His name is Justice." The weeks that followed brought resolution on multiple fronts. Dale Harmon and the Wilcox brothers faced serious charges. Their legal troubles compounded when investigators discovered documentation proving Harmon had deliberately withheld Hope's registration papers at the auction, a clear case of fraud. The DNA test results confirmed Hope's identity as Midnight Cascade, and new registration papers were issued with Thomas Morgan listed as her legal owner. Justice thrived under the watchful eyes of his mother and Thomas, growing stronger each day, his personality emerging as a perfect blend of Hope's gentle temperament and his sire's athletic ability. Hannah predicted he would mature into an exceptional performance horse, though Thomas found himself increasingly reluctant to think about selling him, despite the considerable sum such a sale might bring. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Thomas sat on his porch, watching Hope and Justice graze in the paddock. The foal pranced and bucked occasionally, testing his growing strength, always returning to his mother's side for reassurance. Rusty lay at Thomas's feet, the border collie's eyes never straying far from his charges. "Who would have thought, Rusty?" Thomas mused, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. One split-second decision at an auction, and here we are. In the paddock, Hope raised her head, her ears pricked toward Thomas as if she had heard her name. The mare who had once been so frightened, so wounded, now stood tall and proud, her coat gleaming in the sunlight, her eyes clear and trusting. Thomas raised his hand in greeting, and Hope nickered softly in response, a sound that never failed to warm his heart. Some might see only horses in that paddock, but Thomas saw family, saw the living embodiment of second chances and quiet courage. In saving Hope, he had reaffirmed what mattered most in his long life, not wealth or accolades, but the simple, profound connections forged through compassion, patience, and unwavering faith in the resilience of the spirit. And in that realization, Thomas Morgan had found a peace as enduring as the land that had sustained generations of his family, as precious as the new life that now frolicked beneath the wide Texas sky.